So anyway, today I'm looking in the social sciences, particularly the psychology of misleading information. Not a prime member. Okay. Hey, speaking of which, I just put out I put out a little something the other day. It was Pythagorean day because it was 9 16 25. So you have a plus a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The classic 3 4 5 sided right triangle. Anyway, yeah, that's funny, Ted. Okay, good. Okay, so anyway, today we're in the social sciences. We're looking at the psychology of misleading information. Let me continue here. Okay, so professionally, one of the things that I'm have done, which I feel that, in other words, if you're going to do critical thinking, one of the things you want to do is look at what is the source you're looking at, and to have more than one source. Um, oh no. Okay, I love reading the comments there too. It's just that when the video comes out or whatever, nobody can see the comments, so it's kind of like inside joke or some other thing, or like I have something in my ear that I'm listening to, but I'm actually looking at the comments. Okay, so anyway, um, why should I be telling you about this subject? Well, professionally, I've been working with computers since the 60s, taught them in the military, taught computer science and cybersecurity for 25 years, current chair of the Computer Science Advisory Council at our local uni, etc. Yeah, children of the 60s. Okay, so when, from a professional standpoint, yada, yada. Okay, so when I was young, um, I didn't understand people very well, but I liked tech, knowledge, and science and stuff. And I've learned to work with people, um, and I'm still skeptical. So I'm kind of like the perfect person to look at. Yeah, AM radio is high tech. So I'm kind of like the perfect. Well, FM actually, AM came along first. AM's easy. FM was um, high V. Okay. So anyway, this summer, to give a little background as to not just my background. In other words, why am I talking about I mean, excuse me. Why am I talking about this subject? Um, but this summer, a bunch of us got together because we were aware that it's becoming more and more common for people to kind of make up their own answers to things based on slim evidence. And we wanted to do some formal presentations among ourselves about digital fallacies, particularly what you see online. So I did one on, I did one on digital fallacies. Other people did one on logic and other types of things this summer. So among the terminology, some of the types of things that I want to just throw out there is when we say fallacy, what we're talking about is a reasoning error, which is easy to come by. Almost everybody can fall prey to fallacies or reasoning errors. Misinformation is not intentional necessarily unless it's deceptive. In other words, you're omitting or putting in information which might be deceptive. Okay, so we're bombarded by information, and so it's very easy to miss something or to put things together that weren't there, or to remember two things and think that they were related, all that kind of stuff like that. But misinformation, anyway, is inaccurate information. That's fine. We're human. Or it can be deceptive. But disinformation in particular is selective information intended to mislead. You can do it in graphs, like with math. You can do it in verbiage or whatever, but the idea is that it's intended to mislead you. And I'll show you some examples in science. And then a scam is not just disinformation, but it is intended to get you to act in the interest of the sender, like clicking on something or going somewhere or giving somebody money or whatever. The reference is there. If you want to see some of these, I'll put them in chat. But the idea is this one is from the American Psychological Association, APA. Okay, so more terminology is essentially when we say digital native, there are some fallacies about digital natives. A lot of our group is not digital natives. Like I said, where FM radio was new tech back when I was in school. And there were no computers, and there were no, if anybody can imagine that, let alone email. And I started college with a slide rule. Okay, dinosaur days, that sort of thing. But anyway, a digital native is someone who's never known a time when they didn't have a cell phone glued to their hand. Never known when, social media was where you got your news. That sort of thing. Yeah, but we invented computers, okay? I can tell you everything about how a computer works. So, and we don't fall prey to AI as much because, like I said, we invented computers and the web and the internet and everything else. Okay, so when I say we, I'm talking about boomers. Okay, so digital natives are not intuitively smart about tech. It's just that they were brought up with it. So they're not necessarily smart about its advantages or pitfalls. So they need to be taught the same way as anyone else. Oh, digital, there you go. Okay, Max, digital immigrant. There you go. And V, good. Okay. We welcome people from all generations and interests here, as long as we're all nice about it. Okay, the other fallacy, though, is computer professors like me, retired, are smart about how tech works. I could tell you to the bit level how basically most tech works, and its advantages and pitfalls, but I may not know any more than anyone else about, say, how to work the latest app or the latest social media or anything else. Well, Tag, it depends on your background. When I think of boomers, that's what I think of too, is a nuclear missile submarine. Okay. Just depends on where you came from. Okay. So some of my slides are kind of rich in information, and I don't have enough time to go through everything. But let me go through reboot my clay tablet. Well, at least well, whatever. Okay. So there are three ways of looking at. One of the problems with misinformation is there are different ways of getting information, obtaining information. So I put kind of three up here. One is a theory of knowledge called epistemology. And then psychologists will tell you another thing. And then if you talk to, say, indigenous people in Australia, they Of course, they could also be digital natives and computer professors as well. So I'm not ruling out uh, people or dividing, but in general, if you ask one of the people in okay, well, there you go, runes, etc. If you were to ask one of the indigenous people in Australia, they would tell you that that a lot of them get their information from storytelling, which is of course thousands of years old, from visualizing, in other words, um, mapping a process, so to speak, images worth 1,000 words, particularly if they're related to each other. A nonverbal, reflecting, hands-on, land links. In other words, their knowledge comes from where they are. This place has just like Second Life right here, for people that come here that have been here for 18 years, although they haven't been here for 18 years, but because this island didn't exist. But anyway, in other words, yeah. But in other words, the place they're at has a lot of links to learning. Then the idea of parts being part of a whole system, or a system being part of its, or being composed of parts or community. So instead of going through all of those, the idea then is there's a lot of, Illing, there are lots of different abacus. The last time I actually saw an abacus in work was in a store in Russia, I'm trying to remember the name of the city, but they were very fast. I mean, they were faster than I could use a calculator. In China, okay, um, but it was a Russian abacus, because there's Chinese, Japanese, Russian abacuses, and other thing. Okay, so anyway, the whole idea of this slide is that there are lots of ways that we get information. Okay, but then if we go to what arguments do people use? Oh, thank you. I'm here again. I'm looking at the chat, because I learned, part of the reason for doing these presentations is I learned. I mean, I know what I'm going to say, but I like to learn from this international audience, because it gives me a wider depth of knowledge about these things. Well, and I would, Tag, I would expect then that you would know the mathematical theory then for the different abacuses. Okay, so when people try to pull one over on you, try to get you to do something, what are some of the things they use? Here again, there's so many different ways that they can try to manipulate your mind for you to get to do something. It might be, do it now, or 24 hours, the sale's gone, or or fear. I had one the other day, which I reported, where there was somebody, which you could tell, some of these people are not very bright as far as technology, and you could see their phone number. It was for somewhere in New York City, and they were talking about the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles, and and then being very ambiguous. They basically said, you have a traffic violation. They didn't say what kind, they didn't say when, they didn't have any details of, they didn't even have my name, nothing. But they basically said, if you don't pay up tomorrow, they'll take away your license, they'll do blah, 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 blah. So pressure, emergency, fear, greed, curiosity, all kinds of different ways to get people to do things that we're all subject to. So how do you counter? One is, yeah, exactly. Now, by the way, Sis, you did what I am recommending. In other words, except you mentioned FCC. So it's very, very easy, because you see this stuff all over the news, everywhere in our lines now. But be very careful during our time period here to try not to put names. In other words, you can have examples, but not names. And yeah, no names. You just said FCC, but other than that, but that's okay. You didn't mention the guy name that starts with B. or anyone else. Okay, so that's okay. But in other words, address the issue more or less, rather than the particular instance, unless it's an example like what I said, where I was a subject of this scam thing. Okay, so anyway, a part of it is when you're online. I have a example in here. I'll show you, but it's not like you're sitting down with your computer. Your best friend, the computer, and you're talking to your best friend on the other side. It's when you're online, it's very different. Yeah, subtle science, all of that. Okay, so remember that. Let's pretend you're like in the middle. You're on stage, and somebody says, "Can I pretend you're on stage and everybody's looking at you?" And then somebody asks you, "Oh, can you give us your address?" Are you going to do that, to everybody out there, that sort of thing? So in other words, your personal information is yourself, or yours, period. So be careful who you give any information, yeah, to. That's yours. Because every puzzle piece, in other words, they say, well, just tell us what town you live in, okay? That's, what hurt is it to tell us what town or what state you're in? Okay, that's great. We learned this when I was in the Navy. Essentially, every tiny bit of puzzle piece that you give them makes it easier for them to find you, track you, look at your information, all of that sort of stuff like that. They start with, things like, okay, I'm not mentioning names, okay, but they start with things like, let's change the Gulf over here to the Gulf of America, okay? That's not a big deal, right? And then they see how many people actually just do that, that sort of thing. And then you get deeper and deeper, and if you do that, it's like, okay. That's like when military people are being interrogated. They're supposed to just give their name and stuff, and very basic types of stuff, and not get further into it, because the further you get into it, the more likely that you'll. Yeah, now there's more to it, by the way, than name, rank, and serial number. That dates back to like Vietnam time period, but I won't mention that because that's not part of what we're doing today. Okay, so anyway, there are other places that you can go to check on scams, to report scams, that sort of thing. So let's go back to the general idea of fallacious argument. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter what medium. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to somebody voice to voice, whether you're doing sign language, whether you're online in Second Life, in social media, in wherever, on the phone. It's all the same. So logic is logic. Yes. Hey, by the way, and I also put out, do you know what the original, okay, first of all, we don't know what the original name of the Gulf of Mexico was, because we weren't here. In other words, I don't know what the Mayans or whoever before the Mayans, Mixtecs, other people back then called the Gulf of Mexico. They must have called it something. But the first Europeans actually called it the Gulf of China, believe it or not. If anybody wants to put in text why they might call it the Gulf of China. But that was the first name of that Gulf that's south of. Exactly. Okay, so they called it the Gulf of China. Columbus, that time period, called it Gulf of China, which I think is interesting. Okay. Yeah, maiden name of your mom. Okay, so anyway, there are a lot of fallacies. There's common ones, and then there are more obscure ones. I found one that had 146. Yeah, there you go. Go for Cafe. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the common ones. There's first of all one that's being used. People use, well, I can't generalize, but a lot of people who were in the public, had enough youth, I don't know, social upbringing, whatever you call it, not to just attack people, saying, they're a loser, they're whatever. In other words, it's a cheap shot to attack the other person. That's called ad hominem, personal attacks. Yeah, cheap shot, but it works. Okay, so then there's also the one that basically says, okay, there's only two options. You're either for it or against. And then if you're against it, you're a loser. Okay, so that's called false dichotomy. And then there's one called slippery slope, which basically says, okay, if you don't do this, then the world's going to end, essentially. In other words, and then there's one called, you can read it as well as I do. A occurs before B, so B caused A. In other words, causality, that sort of thing. An acorn fell at the same time as, I was watching whatever on TV, so therefore the TV channel caused the acorn to fall, or vice versa. And then the one that basically says, why don't we invest in renewable energy? And then you take something that's much more egregious and you go, what? You want to shut down fossil fuels and destroy the economy? And by saying let's invest in renewable energy does not necessarily mean that, we want to shut down fossil fuels and destroy the economy. But that's called a straw man. Okay. Now, by the way, this gets more fun. I'm just setting up a foundation here for this. Okay, you can find lots of different places to look for how to evaluate information online, fake news, all that good stuff like that. A false dichotomy on a slippery slope. Okay, but let me show you some fun ones to look at. And so how you deploy the information and how you present it means a lot, because it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to be factual? Or are you trying to get somebody to click on something? Unfortunately, these days, part of the issue is that there are people who want you. It's just like when people had ads on television. The reason they had ads on television is so you'd see the ads. The people who had the ads would then fund part of the television channels, and you'd be watching them, and then so you had to watch the ad if you wanted to watch the television. Okay, great. But nowadays you have so many people who are called influencers who will say or do anything pretty much in order for you to click, see, click again, get angry, go see more of what they're saying, all of that sort of stuff. So it's money. It's always money operated, at least in my book. If you go back to just about anything, it has to do with money. So let's look for some right in here. Okay, now here's the fun part. Watch. Here's the fun part. It's not just a bunch of slides. Okay, this is the actual real story, but this is not the one that I first saw when I was looking at the news. And it basically says, let's look at what it actually says. This is Scientific Reports, and it basically says that in a peacock, there are laser-like properties in order to make the peacock's feathers look as iridescent as they do. But that also you find that, never trust a single source claim is probably a good reason, or a good first step in any of this is get a second opinion, not just from your buds. Okay, so the idea is that there are instances of non-random occurrence. This is the first instance of non-random occurrence, but the laser-like properties can be found in human and other tissues and stuff like that. So now, this is the actual scientific article. let's see how people who want you to click on their article um, can twist this. Watch. This is fun. Okay, so the first thing that you see is peacock feathers can be lasers. Okay, now that, yeah, I know. But wait a second, that's not the worst. But they have, peacock feathers can be lasers. Now, that's not a that's misinformation. In other words, they're focusing in on the lasers, but it's not really lasers. They're not lasers. They have properties that are in common with lasers. Lasers, what they do is because of the size of the area that you've got photons, which then bounce back and forth and become amplified. So laser means light amplification by stimulated emission radiation. Okay. So this is the spin, though, and notice it doesn't just say peacock feathers can become lasers. They're showing you the eye on a peacock feather. It's like, don't look into the eye. Okay, now watch. This is even worse. Watch this one. Peacock feathers can emit laser beams. So they got from, I know. So they got from the scientific article where they showed that there are similar properties in how a laser is able to amplify light as there are peacock feathers. And now they're saying, peacocks are going to take over the world with their laser beams, essentially. Okay, let me show you a couple more because there's a lot of fun ones. So in other words, you might actually see this on the news, but you have to go back and find the actual real truth. Okay. So now let's try it in reverse. This is a fun one too. This is what you might see in the news. There's that scary looking little spider with his beady eyes, and it shows too big, not to be too precise, Gus. Okay. But it goes, spiders didn't come from the earth. Fossil remains show where they really came from. Now, it's a jumping spider. We've got them around here, plus they're kind of small. So now, where did they get, and they're cute. Okay, so now where did they get this information that spiders didn't come from the earth? Okay, watch. This is what the real scientific report was. So the real story was that fossils show that arachnids may have begun in sea creatures. In other words, in creatures in the sea before any animals walked on land. So they use the word land and earth interchangeably to say that spiders didn't come from earth. So that's a very clever twist on words, because no, they didn't come from the land, because they originate, or at least the origins that they can trace arachnids to are pre-Cambrian. So, well, not pre-Cambrian, but essentially before they animals walked on, or fish or whatever walked on land. So that's how you can twist those things. Isn't that amazing? I found that some of these are just a lot of fun to. They're in the ocean. They're not from Earth. They're from ocean. But in any case, if you get these twists. Here's another story. There's some real fun ones here that I looked at. Well, Mike, I think it could be AI. It could be simply people who are not very smart in science. It could be people who want to see this. But let me show you this one. There's a couple ones that are really fun here. Like I said, here's the actual story. The actual story is that 34 million years ago, ice sheets started to cover Antarctica. Okay, now if you're a journalist and you want people to click on your article, you want millions to click, how do you twist this story into a misinformation story? Not really disinformation. They're not getting you to Yeah, they're not trying to get you to, you know, send your money to them to protect them. But how do they twist this one? Anybody have an idea how they twist this one? Okay, here's how they twist it. Scientists discover a 34 million year old lost world below Antarctic ice. This proves we've been lied to. Alien like world discovered beneath Antarctica fuels explosive rift between scientists and truth seekers. I knew it. They've been lying to us all the time. So I know. So they take the idea that they take the idea that there's land beneath Antarctica. Wow. And it hasn't been seen like for 34 million years. It's an alien-like world. And then they just throw that in a meat grinder and out comes gibberish about so that's the type of thing you might see depending on where you look. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Mike, are you a computer or web person? Because you just wrote it in a way that, yeah, HTML. Very good. Okay. The truth comes out. I knew it. I knew it. He was an alien programmer. Okay. So the real story, here's another one. The real story, speaking of programming languages, is that, now this is a little thick here, bold. Very bold, yes. Okay. So in computer programming, there's what's called object orientation, which basically says that you can describe objects in computer language that have properties and behaviors and stuff, and you can have classes of objects that inherit. Now that the word inherit there is where they start messing with this, is that they can inherit these properties or behaviors. So like large language models, which are used for AI, are built from data that they didn't come up with it themselves. They're looking for all this stuff having to do with, say, spiders, and then coming up with whatever somebody asks them about spiders. You know, show me a spider playing cards with a fish, whatever. I don't know. Under the sea, 54 million or 540 million years ago. Okay, that's it. Okay, so anyway, so here's how they twist that one. So instead of the idea of computer programming being object oriented and inheriting things, they go alarming new research. Now, you know, anytime they use words like alarming, you should be alarmed. Okay, suggests that they can pick up subliminal patterns, not just inherit as in, you know, same properties, but subliminal, unimaginably more dangerous behavior, evil tendencies, wiping out the human race. Oh my gee. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. And oh no, will AI robots take over the world? You know. Yeah. If you let them. If you're that stupid. Okay. Now here's some fun ones. Here, a clickbait. You know. Now, by the way, they're not. What I notice on here is that some of these people are not even subtle about what they look at. Like if you look at where or some of the things there, it said share and seed. In other words, like they're seeding misinformation. Wallet.jump. Holy cow! They're not even subtle about what they're trying to do there. For these clickbait type of things to get you to go someplace, which in some cases, by the way, if you don't have your cybersecurity software and thing, will drop a nice little malware on your computer. Okay, so now who is this? For particularly if you have not seen this before. Anybody know? Okay, I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a hint. It's not a who, it's a what. So if you look closely down there in the bottom right, you'll see a name. That name is not a fashion house or a modeling house. That is the name of a company that generates AI for businesses. So this is an AI model, totally AI driven, that's used in a magazine because the magazine was having less customers and they wanted to spice things up, so they have an AI model that models their clothing, etc. And this is the person that they picked. It's not a person. This is the AI image that they picked. Now, long ago, we used to have this thing called the uncanny valley where you had, well, exactly, plus they're totally unrealistic. In other words, everything about them is ideals to certain people, but way out of the ability of anyone to actually be like that. You know, like the thin waists and all that sort of stuff for Barbie and things. This has been going on for some time, and so it's long past, yeah, wasp waist, which actually, if it were a real person, they would have some serious physical disabilities and not be able to walk and that kind of stuff. Okay, so anyway, we're long past what's called the uncanny valley. It used to be in robots that they tried to make robots look like people, but they got to a stage where they were able to make them look just close enough for it to be eerie. So essentially with the AI model here, you could not tell that it was AI driven unless you knew. Okay? So how do you build resistance against, or resilience against this? First of all, know that the web is not just like you're sitting down talking to your friend. The web, like I said, is every time you get on there, your little bits and bytes go anywhere in the world, so it's easy to, they may never disappear. They may be stored on a server forever, so that somebody can, so if you're running for office 40 years from now, they can go back and say, look at what you said on so-and-so social media back 40 years before. And essentially, it's not like everything's evil. It's businesses want, there are honest people there, but there's also pickpockets. It's like walking in a big city. There are honest people. There's people that want your information. There's people that want your money. There's also swindlers and pickpockets. It's just like any big city on earth. So let's look at another one. And yes, I'm using a name in here, but it's for a purpose, so you can ignore the name. But let's read what it says and then what it really says. So what it says is, based on the highly provocative statements of blah, 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 I've ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in an appropriate, in the appropriate regions, just in case blah, 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 blah. I hope this will, not be one of those instances where there's unintended consequences, etc. Now, what is really being said here? If you look at it, you go, oh my goodness, there are nuclear missile submarines being positioned for World War III. Okay. Now, that's a little like the object that entered the solar system, saying that that's a little like the object that entered the solar system. You're going, I wonder what it is. And somebody going, oh, it's obviously an alien spacecraft that's maneuvering to attack Earth. Now, where did you get that? How did you go from A to G like that? That's the same sort of logic as you have here. In reality, there are somewhere between 50 and 70 subs last time I looked. And it's normal to deploy ships to appropriate regions. I mean, you wouldn't want to deploy them to an inappropriate region, right? So in other words, the bottom line is like in Star Wars where it says, okay, move along, there's nothing here. So this is saying nothing. It says absolutely nothing. It's just that people read into it what they want to read into it, which is a lot of what people do. They let you trip yourself up. Okay, so now how do you deal with this? One is that instead of coming up with some sort of technological fixes and cybersecurity software and things where you can't go to a particular site and taking away people's cell phones, although I'm not so sure that's a bad idea for students, is the real solution is digital maturity, is essentially making organizational changes to harness the power of AI, to learn how all this works, to be educated about it. Not abstinence, not technological fixes to technological problems, all of that. So essentially, here's a legitimate article from the National Library of Medicine that says, how do you counteract this infodemic, this which a lot of it is information. Okay, so a recent estimate, of course, says that there's more information that goes on out there than you could possibly even begin to explore properly. So what you have to do is then learn how to find and filter out what you want, just like I've showed you where some of these articles have come from or where they get the information. And how they have twisted, spiders not from Earth, that kind of stuff like that, to be able to tell fact from fiction. And it takes a while to do this. Let's look at then, some universities have some good sites. I found one at University of Iowa at their library. It talks about evaluating online information. Look at and by the way, the ones on the left and the right are not their information. It's my thing that I found online. And take a look at the one on the left. The one on the left says Department of Social Security Home Insurance Program. Well, first of all, what is it actually called? Is it called the Department of Social Security? Look it up. No, it's not. In other words, that's just somebody trying to make you click there because it sounds authoritative. Yeah, Social Security Administration, right? It's not the Department of Social Security. Okay, see if you qualify. Enter your, click on this down here. Okay, now if you look on the one on the right, there's the same thing as the big eye on the peacock feather. In other words, you've got the lady staring at you, and then it's got daughter of seemingly admitted. It doesn't say she did. It doesn't say whatever. That, blah, 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 blah. So it's a little like the other one that seemingly said something and says nothing. So in other words, are they unconnected? What about context? Are they manipulated? Are they satire? Are they misleading, imposter, fabricated? Those are the 7 types of ways that disinformation and misinformation can be believed. So you'd never fall for an online scam, right? Okay, this, by the way, is in the Harvard Gazette, and it shows just how easy it is for people to fall for this stuff. So here's a example, and Stanford's not a minor place, okay? Stanford is where a lot of the people, graduates who founded social media and a lot of other stuff came from, including most of the ones we use today all came from, in particular, earlier stuff like, Google and Facebook and lots of other ones are graduates from Stanford. But what they did was they put a professional organization, a fake site up, website, and how many people actually fell for it and clicked on stuff? Well, you had PhD historians, Stanford undergrads, and fact checkers, professional fact checkers. And if you look at the fact checkers, all were able to discern which was the professional site and which was the fake. But if you look down at the professors, 50% of them got suckered, and for students, 80% of them got suckered essentially. So in other words, it can essentially happen to anyone if you're not careful. So what do we do? Well, this here again is pretty information rich. But the idea is that poor scientific research can have the exact same types of problems. Underrepresented samples, misinterpreted results, no control group, conflicts of interest, no blind test, all of that sort of stuff. Sensationalized headlines. Has anyone actually seen a sensationalized headline in a article? I have, in journals. Well, I may be able to. I'm trying to look for where I got that. But it's in. See where it says compound interest up there. If you look, compound interest, a guide to spotting bad science, and you look that up on Google, I'm sure that you will find this. And by the way, the caveat up there is an educational one, basically saying, okay, great, I borrowed some of your information on the website, but I'm doing it it's a small amount, and I'm doing it for non-commercial project purposes for education. Great, okay. Here's another part, correlation and causation. There's a difference between I was watching a show and a limb fell on my roof to saying I was watching this particular show and it caused a limb to fall on my roof. Okay, there's a very different thing. Selective reporting. Yeah, a limb fell on my roof, but I forgot to tell you that there was a storm going on at the same time. That's selective reporting. Unsupported conclusions. All of this sort of stuff. Yeah, so melting ice cream causes hot taste. It doesn't? Okay, so anyway, you guys are all familiar with this sort of stuff, but I'm actually going over this because not everybody is familiar with all of this stuff. Okay, so why does pseudoscience still persist? Well, people tend to, oh, by the way, at the very beginning, and I have 10 minutes here, and I'm looking at how many slides I have, but at the very beginning, and I think I have 3 or 4 slides, so I have time, is that I am writing an article for a peer-reviewed professional journal that is about virtual worlds. It's over at Virtual Worlds. In fact, you can find the office of the Virtual Worlds Education Consortium called the Avatar Scholar, and I'm writing an article on critical thinking, teaching critical thinking in natural virtual worlds. And I was surprised, I was telling Chantel about it, is that a lot of what we do over here, including these presentations, basically fall under best practices in critical thinking. And same thing in the Moon Group and stuff, what we're doing right now with comparing habitats and stuff. And I was very pleased and surprised that we're doing it over here. And part of it has to do with, like I said, the people who are in the groups having practiced critical thinking for decades in some cases. Boomers have their purposes, right? We've been doing this for how many years? So it isn't instinctive, but it's definitely serendipitous to find that the background information that I'm putting together about critical thinking, I was going, my goodness, that's what we do over at the Science Circle and the Moon-based group, and I'm sure in the Math Club and stuff like that. Oh, by the way, Daily Mail, I never click on Daily Mail articles simply because it's the Daily Mail. but I can read what it's about. Giant babies, reason, newborn. Yeah, okay. Um, oh, the Guardian. Yeah, that's just. I'll probably be sued here. Okay, so I won't say anything about them. Oh, they're just fine. Great. If you want to read those things that they say, and then do some critical thinking about whether what you're reading is true or not. Okay. So anyway, why does pseudoscience still persist? Well, one is simple explanations. And when I was looking at critical thinking and some of the modern articles on critical thinking, they were basically saying that when we get to an explanation, that any explanation that's good enough, we don't go any further. A simple explanation is just fine. Why should I take the time to, go look up a second source and all that? If it makes sense to me, well, it makes sense. Great. Okay. So simple but wrong explanations, marketing gimmicks, answers you want to hear. Yeah, confirmation bias. Absolutely. Things you want to hear, things that confirm what you want to hear, what you want to see. Also, if it says that if you eat, or I don't know, cantaloupes with Tabasco sauce every morning without fail, that you won't get any cancers, that's what you want to hear, okay? It's hopeful. You're desperate. That sort of thing. So, in other words, people still believe in stuff like that because that's what they want to hear. It gives them hope, that sort of thing. And cognition bias, in other words, overestimating yourself. I can't fall for this. Surely what I know and believe is true and everyone else is wrong, Okay, so now there are places you can go to check on facts. Snopes is one of them. There's one called, reality checks. You can go to a bunch of different places to be able to see. And all you have to do is just type the first, in other words, if you get an email or something, or a chat, type the first words into there, and it's just going to pop up that, yes, this is a scam. It's been going on for so and so years, etc. All of that sort of stuff like that. Okay. Now, and then my last slide, except I'm going to give you a link, which I think is helpful because you guys are talking about media. There's a great link that shows you which media is biased toward what they're biased toward. Well, yeah, clicking on any click is money. It's all about money. It's always about money, ever about money. Since the beginning, since the beginning of money. Okay, so if you can't beat them, why not use AI to try to find patterns in misinformation that will tell you that it's misinformation? In other words, this particular university is trying to do that so that essentially, instead of just a cybersecurity software, that we can have an AI software that we can go, is this misinformation or disinformation? Is it true? And the AI can then go, no, it's not. And this is what other sources say and stuff. And so it will take you a lot less time. As long as you can trust that AI. And I use it. But on the other hand, Peg, what Snopes does is it shows you sources and other types of stuff. It doesn't just say, yes, it's true. No, it's not. Like AI does. If you go to like AI version of software, it'll say blah, 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 blah. And unless you click on it, yeah. And unless you go looking for it's like Wikipedia, okay, or anything else. It's a great place to look for information and get it. AI and stuff, it takes you a lot shorter time. But then you have to actually go to the source and see what they said. It's kind of like the fighter not originating from land and New World found under 34 million years of ice, and all of that sort of stuff. It's distortions of the truth, and so you have to find out what the truth and how did they distort it and all that good stuff like that. Now there is a good website. I'm going to try to find it here because I got a couple more minutes and nobody's left yet that I can tell. So let me look for it because I know it's somewhere, but my desktop is so messy on my laptop. So has anyone seen this? I used to show this to my, let's see, is this it here? I'm looking for it. I'm still here. Hang on a second. Well, okay. There are places like this that you can go that will give you different examples. This is not the one I'm looking for. Okay, the one I'm looking for is a visual one that is very good about. Oh, there we go. Okay, hang on a second. It's called Media Bias Chart. There. Okay, interactive media bias chart. This is wonderful. This one here, to me, is marvelous because it's all interactive. And so what you can do is you can go to a site, and then this one right here is my favorite. And you go to that, and you'll see lots and lots and lots of different sources. And so it shows you for each of those sources, and then you can look up different articles. In other words, it shows from extreme left to most extreme far right, political biases, news value, reliability. You can look for particular articles and how reliable they are. There's just lots and lots of information in here so in other words, when you look at a particular source, you can go and check on whether that source is how far, what they lean politically. I think it's a marvelous site. And there's TV, video, podcasts, audio, websites, articles, blah 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 blah. So you can see that. Okay, so we're now on the hour, and that's the place I would look first if I wanted to see if a particular magazine or website or podcast or whatever, where they lean politically. Okay. Any comments? We're on the hour. That's my presentation for today. Now, I'd love to share with you some of the stuff I found about critical thinking, and I will. I'll next time we have a slot open, probably beginning of the year or something.